Welcome to the next section of the course. Let's talk today about inline and block elements. It's one of the fundamental divisions of the elements in CSS. This division strongly influences how these elements behave. We need to understand the division of the elements into the inline and the block in order to be able to discuss the box model, which we will also talk about in this section. Most of the elements on the websites are the block elements. The most popular ones are div, article, p, section, etc. You already know most of these elements. The rest you will learn soon. There are many more block elements than the inline ones. As I said, there are many less inline elements on the websites. The most popular of them are A, which is a hyperlink, img, which is an image, span, strong, b, etc. The A, span, and img elements are the most popular, and we will use them most often in our work. The block elements are assigned display block property by default. They are initiated this way. This property affects how the element behaves. There are several values for the display property. The value of block defines our element as the block element, which gives rise to some characteristics of this type of the elements that I would like to talk about now. The block elements start with the new line. Each of them starts and ends a new line. If you create 4 div tags in your document's body, each of them will start with the new line. So all the block elements are arranged underneath each other by default, which is due to the fact that all the block elements are 100% of the width of their parents by default, so 2 divs cannot be next to each other, since each of them takes up the entire width of the container in which it is located. But even if we reduce the default width of the block element so that it is only 50% of the parent's width, so that 2 block elements could fit next to each other in one line, even then the block elements will by default arrange themselves below each other. Of course, we can change that, but we will learn about it later in the course. As I said before, the block elements always have 100% of their parent's width by default, and their height is automatic and depends on the amount of the content. So they take as much height as they need to display their content, text or image. On the example, we can see 2 block elements with the text inside. We can see that their height matches the amount of the text they contain, while their width is set to 100% of the parent, even though the text inside does not need that much width space. One block element may contain other block elements by nesting, as we can see in the example. In the div tag, we have placed another div tag with the section into which we put the header. Each of these elements is a block element, and their nesting within one another is as natural as possible. The block elements may contain the inline elements inside as well. I pay attention to this because it will not be possible in the other direction, which I will tell you about later. However, in this example, we can see that in the div tag, which is a block element, we have placed another block element, which is a p tag, and in it we place the inline element, which is a strong tag. It is worth noting that in the code editors, the syntax most often keeps the inline elements in one line, as you can see in this example. The strong tag inside the p tag is placed in the same line in the code. In this example, we can see a div element with the class of text, with the text inside contained, within a div element with the class of wrap. Both have the same height defined as auto, due to the text inside of a div with the class of text. A wrap div has the default of 100% parent's width, and the text div is set to 70% of its parent's width, which is a wrap div. A div with the text has an orange background, and a div which wraps it has a blue background. If the text inside the text div would grow, the parent div would also grow. The content expands the height of the elements, and therefore the height of their parent elements as well. We have full control over the block elements. We can freely define and change their width, height, padding, margin, and border. So the block elements are very convenient for the developer because they are flexible. We can edit them freely. The inline elements are defined by the display inline property, which you can see on this slide. The most popular inline elements that we will often use are span, strong, img, and a. The inline elements do not form a new line as the block elements do. If we create 3 span elements in our document, by default they will be displayed in one line next to each other, which is exactly what we can see in this example. We have put some inline elements in a block P element, and we can see that all the text is displayed in one line. This is how we usually use the inline elements on the websites. We wrap some text fragments with them that we want to emphasize, bold, or italicize without destroying the structure of the text. If the inline elements are placed immediately after or before a block element, they will start on a new line because the block element starts a new line and ends a new line. The block element takes up the whole line for itself. You can imagine it as hitting the enter key before and after the block element. So if we put a block P element between the inline span elements, the block P element will break the line before it and after it, as it always takes the whole line for itself by default. Inline elements can be nested within the block elements, but the block elements should not be nested within the inline elements. This is incorrect. It's against the HTML language principles, and we shouldn't do it, even though the browser can handle displaying such nested elements. The height and the width of the inline element depends on the size of their content. So in such an element, the value of the width and the height properties are set to auto. Such an element is as high and as wide as it needs to be to display its content. Changing the height and the width of the inline element does nothing. You can say that the inline elements are stubborn. The display inline property prevents us from changing these values. Inline elements width and height will be always set to auto. That's why the block elements are more friendly when it comes to their modification. And while we can add margin values for right and left, not for bottom and top, as well as padding and border, it does cause some complications. For now, let's just remember that you can use right and left margin, as well as padding and border, but behaving with other elements can cause various problems. You can't use the width and the height properties because they won't do anything. However, the inline element can become a block element. All you have to do is to change the property from display inline to display block. Such an element is no longer inline and can be treated as a block. It also changes its width from auto to 100%. Remember that it also works the other way around, although it is barely used. We can also transform the block elements into the inline elements, but we usually don't want to do that. We simply rather want to freely style some inline elements as easily as the block elements. We usually don't want to change the block element into the inline one and lose the control of it, but technically it's possible with no problem. img is the inline element that is unique. It's a replaced element. What comes from the src, so the actual picture, replaces the img content, and we can therefore determine its height and width. This element pushes out the image from the inside, but we will talk more about it in the image topic. The img itself is inline, but not its content from the source. So we can freely style it as a block element, as long as it has an actual image inside, provided by the src attribute. An empty img element without any picture inside is treated as any other inline element. Let's make a summary of our knowledge about the block elements. Every block element is always 100% of its parent width by default. Its height is determined by the auto value. It will be as high as it needs to display its content. An empty block element will have 100% of its parent width and 0 height. Every block element starts with the new line and ends with the new line. So by default, the block elements are set below each other. Now a summary of the knowledge about the inline elements. Their height and width are set to auto, which means that their size is exactly as they need to display their content. The empty inline element will have 0 height and 0 width. We cannot change the height and the width of the inline element. Using the height and the width property will do nothing. Such an element do not create a new line. The inline elements set themselves next to each other in one line. You can use margin left, margin right, padding and border properties to style it. If we want to work on the height and the width of such an element, we can change its property from display inline, which it has, to display block, and this way transform it into the block element. Now I will show you in practice everything I was talking about.